So this is 5 minutes after 8 in the morning of Saturday, 5th of June, 2021. And this is the KhoodeelaarTV television channel being broadcast only on the internet from London in the UK with a quotation mark. And we are not broadcasting on any other platforms, terrestrial or satellite or cable. The reference to terrestrial is, of course, in other words, a reference to what is known ordinarily conventional television channels. And the financial crimes FT weekend is vindicating us by stuffing this edition with lies. And denials of the existence of the many, and denials of the existence of the rest of the world outside of Little England. The reluctant references to the existence of the USA is very much in the colonial mindset, and the fact that this financial crimes ordinary editions, not the FT weekend edition, is edited by a woman born in Lebanon and is allegedly connected with a Muslim background, makes no difference to the imperialistic, racist, anti-Muslim contents of the financial crimes. And the Rupert Murdoch Times has got this one as one of the supplements, and this advertisement, and this one advertisement, and the front page heading reads, Sainsbury's helping everyone eat better. Let's eat the world better, one plate at a time. That's what it says. And it's a complete misinformation. And the lying agenda in denial of the rest of the world outside of Little England is festering in the contents and the headings of this magazine, the Times magazine, Saturday. And I got a series of items about what it means being a teenage boy today. and they've got too many people with African origin appearances, but they are being treated as stooges culturally and in terms of content and in terms of the fact that they are serving the agenda of the few. With Anglo-Saxon names like Bark, it is inevitable that these stooges will not be opposing racism, colonialism, imperialism, and corruption. Now let's start with the front page of the Times, which we have posted tweets about. This is the one. The COVID infections surge. Now, when on Wednesday, the 2nd of June 2021, the Fleet Street liars over-celebrated a fact which was completely irrelevant, that the previous day there was no deaths recorded, as the lying Fleet Street papers claimed, of coronavirus. And they therefore equated that alleged fact as proof, conclusive proof, that there was no need for continuing the lockdown in Britain. And they ran dozens of pieces under various guises and disguises, each of the Fleet Street outlets, making the case that the lockdown should be lifted because there was no death on the 1st of June, Tuesday, linked with the COVID virus. Now, we said that was an absolute lie and a criminally intended lie to shore up the corrupt regime fronted by Boris Johnson. And it has come to be vindicated immediately. But today, Saturday, the 5th of June, 2021, the Rupert Murdoch's Times runs this COVID infection surge, and underneath it is the subheading, fastest rise since September. Fastest rise since September, which is October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May, June. 9 months. October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May, June. 9 months. So why this is happening? They don't explain. They won't explain. But they have to admit that that is the inevitable kind of pressure coming from the numbers. And it's the same health editor called Catley and another 3 names. Catley led the lying on Wednesday. So what they're saying is that coronavirus cause cases have surged by 76% in a week. Now, that is the fact that they're admitting. And they're also linking that with the government insisting that big reopening is on course. Now, with Boris Johnson, he will do that, because Boris Johnson is the one that saved, let thousands of bodies pile up, as he delayed, crucially delayed by weeks, the first imposition of the lockdown in 2020, more than a year ago. So he is never in support of policy mainly linked to saving lives, protecting people. He's mainly concerned about exploiting people, abandoning them, neglecting them, and abusing the, quote, power that he has, being the incumbent in the post of the so-called prime minister. And despite the huge publicity by at least one section of the conservative right-wing kind of Brexiteering mob in Fleet Street for the Indian origin finance minister Rishi Sunak, who is a multi-millionaire many times over. Despite the fact that they promoted him as almost kind of impatient to take over as the occupant in the post of prime minister, because of widespread reports about Boris Johnson being unfit. And despite the fact that they called him independent of Johnson in terms of making policies. Rishi Sunak is no such thing. He's not independent. Rishi Sunak is correctly identified. When he was first appointed by Johnson to that post, Sunak was identified as a stooge for Johnson and Johnson-fronted cabal. And that is what is happening with Sunak. Contrary to the kind of promotion that he is an independent finance minister and is not being played by Johnson, he is being played by Johnson, and he's an extension of the corrupt cabal fronted by Johnson. Now remember what we said in part A today about the world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. The figure of a criminal, look up criminal, that is what we mean, criminal, called Kevin Collins. He's been featuring in the news in Fleet Street for the last week about the fact that he resigned as the so-called czar for catching up, schools catch-up czar. Now, we explained yesterday why we called Kevin Collins a liar, because of evidence. And anyone who wants to know what we actually said can check the contents of the broadcast taped editions of yesterday. And anyone wants to go back further than yesterday can also go back further and check our published stance, running now since 2009, and calling Colin Kevins a liar from 2009 onwards. And that is to do with his role in the conspiracy and the corruption in Tower Hamlets Council to foist the corrupt post of elected mayor on the council. That is one. And the other is that he lied. He featured perpetrating a series of lies on a program on Channel 4 television. It's a corrupt slot called Undercover Boss. And in that Undercover Boss, Kevin Collins lied. And Kevin Collins lied against the facts about housing and against the facts about the council, Tower Hamlets Council's perpetration of lies and dishonesty and denials of the many in Tower Hamlets Borough. And again, what we said, of course, was before the onset of this particular slot television channel. We did that on the blogs, on Twitter, and in our publications, otherwise, including in comments that we posted online on the website of the London Evening No Standard, which had published a promotion of Kevin Collins on a date between 2009 and 2010, I think. So that is the second thing he did. Second, lot of lying and corruption and criminality perpetrated by Kevin Collins. And then within the council, the liar perpetrated assorted other crimes, covering up the lies, covering up the denials, covering up the misrepresentation, falsification, and denial of the duties that the council owed to the particular relevant members of the population in Tower Hamlets. Now, Kevin Collins, of course, is loaded either way, either side of his name, with too many gongs and appreciations. He's made a knight. That means he's called Sir Kevin Collins. And he's got a number of other things around his name. So he has been featuring in Fleet Street papers in the last few days as the kind of symbol, if you like, of a supposed criticism of Boris Johnson's regime over the refusal by Johnson's regime to fund the so-called schools catch-up propaganda. Now, this is the two-page spread on pages 12 and 13, where the main size photograph has got Rishi Sunak, and the second size is one of Johnson, and the third is Kevin Collins. And this says, money seemed to be no object. Then suddenly it was Oliver Wright, Elena Correa, and Rachel Sylvester Wright. Now this is the list of byline writers, that Oliver Wright, Elena Correa, and Rachel Sylvester. And heading to their piece on page 12 of the two-page spread reads, how Prime Minister backed away from the promises he made to schools czar. Remember what we have said about Kevin Collins being a liar? Now, according to this one, they are painting him as the saint. Now, of course, Johnson is a liar. And we have said, so is Kevin Collins. But they are saying that Johnson is the liar, but Kevin Collins is the saint. And this is a festival of misinformation and false information and propaganda taking place within the Conservative Party. Now, this is a piece written mainly by Oliver Wright, Elena Khoury, or Khuria, and Rachel Sylvester, with additional reporting by Henry Zafman. It's a 3-column piece, and it's an absolute promotion of Kevin Collins. So we are not going to read line by line. That is the first point that we make about this. It's Kevin Collins being treated as a saint. And it's about 15 billion that Johnson committed himself to fund the catch-up regime, whatever this is. And they're concluding this piece. The concluding paragraph is Collins, that is Kevin Collins, like so many before him, has found out the hard way that he simply cannot trust what this Prime Minister says, even in private, one critic said. Now, in Tower Hamlets, where Kevin Collins facilitated Luther Roman's lying, I mean, he couldn't trust either Collins or Luther Roman, whether Luther Roman had promised something in public or in private, or repeatedly. So obviously, all these writers on the Times group, they're all right-wingers and Brexiteers and assorted other kind of affiliates. These are all lying. In a collective way, they're lying in installing the image of Kevin Collins as a saint. Kevin Collins never was a saint and never was properly involved in enlightened policy for education or schools. Although he has a background as a school teacher in Tower Hamlets before he got appointed by the corrupt crooks in the Tower Hamlets Council. So there is one paragraph that says that Whitehall sources said Johnson had seemed to back the full £15 billion plan being proposed by Collins when it was submitted to Downing Street several weeks ago. But then the Treasury got involved. Officials in Rishi Sunak's department reacted to Collins's plan by going through it by line, challenging its assumptions on the effectiveness of the measures he was advocating to improve educational attainment. Well, we don't know these people who went through Collins's proposal line by line, but we know for a fact that Collins was no educator. He was not an educational revolutionary. He was not enlightened. He's a crook. He's a lying, opportunist self-server. The reason why we had to write to the London Evening No Standard, which has since hidden our comment, because they keep hiding comments, these online so-called newspapers, was because he appeared separately. He did another program on television arguing for the elected mayor post. And there was no evidence that any democratic demand among the active people in campaigning for any level or quality of democracy in Tower Hamlets had even said or suggested the possibility that an elected mayor should be the way to misgovern the already misgoverned Tower Hamlets Council. No elected councillor exists in place as we speak, today the 5th of June, 2021. And none has existed in the last 21 years. 21 years is a reference to the year of the legislation that brought in the provision for having elected mayors in England, English boroughs and in regions. And the election of Ken Lying Still Livingstone to that post took place in 2000. And 2 years later, the East London Borough of Newham had its first elected mayor, imposed in the personality, the embodiment of corruption, racism, and backwardness and stupidity, Robin Wales. Anyone who wants to know about Robin Wales should read up, because I have extensively published about his lying and his corruption and his stupidity, including my direct challenge to him on a, quote, live program on a satellite channel broadcast on the 14th of March 2018, when I repeatedly emphasized a number of uniquely evidential criticisms of Wales's unfitness and his hostility to democracy and his corrupt regime under his incumbency as the mayor post holder in Newham. So Kevin Collins being featured in the Times today as a saint against Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak is another extensive and very serious because the space they are giving to promoting Kevin Collins is the basis for my saying it serious. Because most of the gullibles and most people who are not intellectually engaged with evidence or intellectually actively able to assess or investigate the evidence or look for the evidence would follow rather than just note the promotion of Kevin Collins in the Times today and by the Times today. And even the rest of Fleet Street would take a positive, favorable note of the Times' promotion of Kevin Collins today. Now, Collins, being a former bureaucrat and Tower Hamlets Council chief executive, had a vested interest and has a vested interest in making the case, however misleadingly, under the banner of education czar, education catch-up, that would land or put a lot of money in the hands of the schools' bureaucracies and significant amounts of money in the hands of Tower Hamlets Council and similar councils' bureaucracies. Kevin Collins is not a thinker in the objective, independent sense of the term, and he most certainly is not an educator, let alone educationist. Now we shall go back to Kevin Collins later. Let's take a look at the Financial Times, Weekend Financial Times, or FT. What is it? FT Weekend, as it is called. We call the Financial Times the Financial Crimes because of the lying agenda it serves. And we call the FT, well, FT Weekend. We should Financial Crimes Weekend, let's say, weekend edition of the financial crimes. Remember what we say about Kevin Collins. Kevin Collins is being elevated to the level of being a saint against the policies of Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak. And one of the things that the financial crimes is admitting is that there is no constitution. There is no such thing as British Constitution. The Financial Times has got a promotional piece for the same agenda associated with Kevin Collins. And this one is byline 2, David Laws, the liar who was forced to resign as a condemned collusion minister in the name of education during 2012 and 2015. And this overhyped, what is she? She is the director for Institute of Government, a think tank. And the headline to her piece, or heading, because it's a two-lined heading, Britain's flexible constitution has had its day, and she is described as the director of the Institute for Government. Now, this director of Institute for Government is one of the insiders in the generally described and defined and identified establishment opinion makers and commentators. Now, she was a journalist before Bronwyn Maddox, connected with the financial crimes as well. And she has been kind of promoted, just like Kevin Collins. I mean, these people are self-servers, essentially, and they don't tell the truth as a result. What they do is come across as not quite being in full agreement with the rest of their cabals and ilk. So, Bronwyn Maddox is given space on the Radio 4 and other outlets on the BBC and Channel 4 and ITV, Sky News, etc., as one of the, quote, thinking members of the establishment, with the slight edge that she's a speaker of her mind, but she's not. Why? Because when during the 4 years after the so-called Brexit referendum, the BBC, Sky News, and other platforms, including the Fleet Street versions, tried to explain to the readers and the viewers the various aspects of the consequences of Brexit, the impact of Brexit, and so on. None of their contributors, none of the members of the Institute of Government or for Government came across as being interested in telling the truth. They came across as telling the things that the narrative of the day kind of expected. Narrative run by the platforms they were appearing on, say Sky News, Adam Bolton, and other frontiers, appeared to be critical, but they were not. And they were not, most certainly, they were not telling the truth. So this piece by Brown and Maddox, headed Britain's Flexible Constitution has had its day, is not going to contain anything original, and is not going to focus any analytical energy on getting rid of corruption, which is what the British Constitution, Flexible Constitution, is. Now let's see if there is any sign of corruption. Well, let's see if there is any sign of awareness of the need to end corruption in the Flexible Constitution. Spending a little, reading again, spending a life shuttling between families in the UK and US, I have always enjoyed the unspoken flexibility of Britain, a country with an aversion to writing down the rules by which it runs. The Christmas after my mother died in the UK, we all attempted a gathering in upstate New York. The shattering of previous tradition meant we went overboard on presents. Let's have rules next year for maximum spending, one American relative said. Or let's not, I quietly thought. Let's just admit it. Reading again. Let's just admit it was over the top and avoid that next time. For years, I took similar view towards Britain's constitution. Why agonize as brand new countries after civil wars must over the painful compromise of a written text? Why not revel in a constitution that has evolved over centuries through treaties, acts of the monarch and parliament, and assorted legal decisions? Now that summary is absolutely stupid, because that is not true. Because the Constitution has not evolved over centuries through treaties, because the treaties are ignored, as we have been pointing out for the last 1+ year since we started talking about this. But, well, since we started talking on air, online, in broadcast form, let's say. I have changed my mind, says Bronwyn Maddox. The UK's famed flexibility of constitutional arrangements has had its day. The advantages are now outweighed by the sense that when rules inconvenience a government, it just makes new ones up. No one would be well advised to try to write the UK a whole constitution. The effort might even break up the country. But on key questions, it is now time for something more formal. Now she is placing less significance and importance on the breakup of the country than on finding something more formal, as she says. And, well, she admits the contradiction as well. The UK does have a largely written constitution, just not in a single text. Statutes, conventions, and judicial decisions laid down in sedimentary layers make up the rules by which it governs itself. The principle that Parliament is sovereign at the core for all the UK's image as a repository of tradition, that flexibility has allowed it extraordinary ability to change with the times. It means Tony Blair would get rid of one version of the House of Lords and arrange devolution in just months. It enabled the rapid creation of a Supreme Court in 2009, taking on powers previously embedded within Parliament. But that flexibility also means a government can rejig rules to suit itself. During the coronavirus pandemic and the Brexit negotiations, the current government has done just that. Dominic Cummings, Boris Johnson's former chief advisor, painted a picture for Parliament last week of a prime minister unbothered by rules, for instance, on funding of the refurbishment of his Downing Street flat. And she goes on repeating some of the most recent headlines in the way that the crook Philip Alston, the Australian law academic based in the USA, did when he cooked up the report, so-called, of his visit of the UK in 2018, apparently looking at extreme poverty and housing. Philip Alston is a liar. We have called him a liar on the record since 2018. And Brendan Maddox, as I said, Maddox, she is a journalist and she's just doing another piece of journalism in this. And she doesn't criticize any of the inadequacies and corruption in any part of the state or any part of the flexible constitution. She just says that the time has come to discard some of the old flexibilities and write them down. So that is exactly what Brendan Maddox has been doing in her career as a journalist before she became this director of the Institute for Government, a think tank. And the fact that she is so shallow and she is so dishonest does not help any claim that she may make as being a reliable, authentic commentator of substance about the future of this country in terms of its lack of accountability and its corrupt core. And remember, the financial crimes is the kind of serious paper on Fleet Street. If it is that shallow, then God help us. Anyone who doesn't have access to the Financial Times contents may need to know that it is full of bourgeois garbage. The letters page is absolutely packed full of bourgeois garbage. And the main editorial piece in the Financial Crimes is for the agenda to reduce number of people in the world and family planning. Now let's see what the main justification of that murderous policy is. Government should concentrate on enabling women's choices. Where birth rates drop dramatically, it often reflects that something is interfering with the people's ability to make truly free choices. Patriarchal expectations of how women should care for both young children and elderly parents can mean some opt out of starting families entirely. A lack of access to childcare, discrimination against mothers at work, and a career penalty for taking time off for child rearing also have an impact on fertility choices. Achieving real freedom of choice rather than maintaining a human resources should now be the focus. Now that is another completely stupid and racist piece of denial. Women, as we have said on the facts, are not the same within society. Ethnicity, faith, and other classifiable kind of categories make the collective expression of women completely, in practical terms, unrepresentative, untruthful. And that is the case there in the paragraph that I've read. And it is only in the UK's context that we are talking about. That doesn't even take into account the rest of the world. Now, the front page of the Financial Crimes today has got the lead item, which says, big economies set to unveil deal on taxing multinational profits. And it boasts that this is the first reform of its kind in a century. And it says the leading advanced economies are set to strike a common position on taxing multinational companies today in a bid to end a 3-decade race to the bottom two in corporate taxation and raise extra revenue for governments. Finance ministers were still haggling over details of the deal late yesterday at a G7 meeting in London hosted by Chancellor Rishi Sunak. Delegates said that G7 would agree in principle to change the basis of global corporate tax law for the first time in a century. The historic plan aims to force the biggest companies to pay more tax in countries where they do business, not only where they are headquartered. One person closely involved with the negotiations said they expected a very good communiqué when the talks wrap up today. Countries have been negotiating to seek an international tax accord since 2013, and talks have been conducted at the OECD for the past couple of years. The US and European countries are at loggerheads, especially over the taxation of the big US tech companies. and it goes on. There is nothing original in the rest of it. So this is the piece about the arrangements that Boris Johnson is making to stage another U-turn about the date for the lifting of the restrictions on coronavirus. Civil servants are working on contingency plans to delay a planned June 21st easing of England's lockdown restrictions, as official figures showed further significant rise in coronavirus cases. So there is no need to read that one, any more part or any more paragraphs in that one. And we shall be looking at the financial crimes is absolutely dishonestly edited, let's say, because everything it says about what it should say straight directly it does with a reluctance. If you notice what I've read from the piece by Bronwyn Maddox, you can see what I'm referring to. It's like a suffocated person trying to deliver an opinion or voice an opinion, let's say. And there is an admission here that people are taking kind of seriously the warning that is contained in the increased surge of the infections. Staycation, that is staying at home instead of going abroad for holiday. That is what the item is. The summer getaways. Domestic holidays groups report surge of interest after green list update. And that refers to the relegation of Portugal as a safe kind of destination. And the UK is actually following the option or the opportunity or the approach that it implemented in the agreement, tariff-free agreement with Australia. Because in the deal yesterday, cheese, pork and poultry tariffs were cut in UK-Norway trade deal. So that what they're doing is reducing taxes, let's say. by way of trying to enhance a sinking economy otherwise due to the Brexit. And the G7 location in Cornwall is being discussed in this piece, which has got the heading G7 given reluctant welcome in Cornwall. And this is summit local reaction. So the piece about Cornwall and the impact this G7 summit is having on the local people is absolutely, understandably gloomy, to the point that American President Joe Biden's security personnel have destroyed plants and trees, like HS2 is destroying plants and trees and massacring hundreds of thousands of animals. And there is no recognition of Cornwall as a independent country. So and there is this, as I said, bourgeois rubbish. This is on page 3. Private clubs in London dig deep after COVID storm. Rebirth of conduit offers hope to upmarket venues, attempting to lure members back. These are not the many. These are the few that the financial crimes is promoting. Now this is an unprecedented piece. This is a piece about Burma. But this is a piece about Burma that actually fiercely denies the genocide of the Muslim Rohingyas. And it skips decades backwards and talks about the 1960s. She is brazenly anti-Muslim and untruthful and racist. Now we shall be talking about that more. Now have a look at this one from the woman in India. Nilanjana Roy, who is reading the world. And Nilanjana Roy is supposed to be a reviewer of books, and her picture there in a sari is false, because she wears non-Asian kind of clothes in most of her appearances. And she is promoting Saitan Rushdie in this one. And she certifies that Saitan Rushdie is passionate for free speech. And she says he's passionate and persuasive in making the call for free speech. And she is absolutely in denial of the reality of India, reality of the world, of Britain. She's giving Saitan Rushdie a whole column in the financial crimes. And it's absolutely typical of Fleet Street. Although she is based in India, she is a stooge for Fleet Street. So there is a review or promotion about 2 books about London, 17th century London. We shall be diagnosing those ones or diagnosing that piece later. It is amazing that the financial crimes, as I said, which originally, well, during the let's say 5 days from Monday to Saturday, the financial crimes, that is the ordinary paper, from Monday to Friday, is edited by a woman who was born in Lebanon. And I would say that she's of Muslim kind of birth and upbringing, whatever the details culturally, but she's being used as so many, quote, Muslim origin women are in the West. Well, the Indian one who is doing the promotion for Saitan Rushdie is a Hindu woman, but the role that the Hindu ones are being put to is a different one, because the Muslim ones are in deadly denial of everything to do with the Muslim kind of origin. So it's an annihilation of the Muslim identity that the Crusaders aimed to achieve, and what the murderers and genocides of the Muslims in Spain actually achieved. The annihilation of Muslims, all traces of Muslim. Although the Muslims in Spain lived, quote, lived for hundreds of years. And the antagonism to Muslims is more active, more lively, more explosive, and more deep-seated than anyone watching this would think, without having the benefit of the necessary reminders, information pointers. And as I've said, and I keep saying, the propulsion behind the vigor and liveliness of anything to do with British politics comes from hostility, racist hostility on one level, and racist anti-Muslim antagonism on a deeper level. Now, the anti-Muslim antagonism is not operated just by non-Muslim Anglo-Saxon people. This is extended as a kind of like call center, remote location, extended to include people of African, Caribbean origin, and people of Indian origin, Indian non-Muslim origins. So we see significant numbers of people of Indian origin, non-Muslim origin, and African, non-Muslim, of course, origins, in all the main anti-Muslim kind of headlined events and propaganda in the UK. And the same thing happens in the USA, in North America. And the fact that they have adopted the image, that they created of this child that they rescued from Pakistan, Malala Yousafzai, is absolutely telling. Because personally, Malala Yousafzai is very different from what her users and exploiters paint her to be. She still believes in so many values that anyone reading her kind of portrait as written and scripted by her exploiters would think non-existent. She does believe in values that exist in Pakistan, in Muslim countries, Muslim communities. And she feels the pressure and the weight and the adversity and the venom of racism and anti-Muslim hostility and rejection of Muslims as inherently entitled to equality and acceptance and recognition. So the Crusaders are working in the financial crimes. And the Crusaders are not working just against the Muslims. The Crusaders are working against the many people in the community that are Anglo-Saxon, white people, but of a different category in terms of class. So this is the weekend FT or FT weekend supplement. That's what they call it, misleadingly, house and home. But house and home is not about housing rights. And house and home is not about human rights. It is about perpetuating the denial of rights to the many. Denial of rights to housing, denial of human rights to the many. And in this piece on the Financial Times, House and Homes, page 6, House and Home, FT Weekend Supplement, page 6, fair and square, and it says, UK property, homes with access to London's beautiful garden squares are at more of a premium than ever due to the pandemic. Now, it is so offensively stupid. What else could it be? But this is a pointless, socially and societally, pointless and repugnant, outrageous denial of the truth of the lack of housing and the truth about the literally hundreds of thousands of people denied housing and human rights right across Little England. We shall revisit those later. Let's go back to the Times and see what it is saying about and they're celebrating. This is like they're celebrating in the Times, they're celebrating Belize, where this confusingly described woman who murdered the black policeman is being featured. Now, this man was the man who was murdered was due to become the police chief. Belize's top police officer has said that he used to clash with Henry GMT, the officer allegedly shot dead by Jasmine Hartin. They're still claiming, covering up Ashcroft, saying that his son's wife or lover, Jasmine Hartin, allegedly shot the black man GMT dead. And they are now even adding a new description that they are calling her Ashcroft's son's girlfriend. She has been called his wife or his partner. Now they are calling her his girlfriend. GMT 42, who was on course to become the country's top officer, was nicknamed Big Haul because of his success in seizing firearms and drugs in Belize City. Hartin, 32, is in the central prison awaiting trial for manslaughter by negligence. She was said to have been found covered in blood on a jetty in the island of Ambergris Cay, with GMT's body in the water. Police records indicate that a loud bang was heard from the beachfront at the Mata Rocks resort in the town of San Pedro at 12:45 a.m. on 18th of May. An apparent gunshot wound was found at the back of GMT's right ear. A post-mortem examination showed he died of a brain hemorrhage as a result of the wound. Hartin ran a luxury hotel with Andrew Ashcroft, 43, the son of the former Conservative treasurer, Lord Ashcroft. The couple were friends of GMT. A bail hearing for Hartin is expected on Wednesday. Williams, 49, told 7 News Belize, "I knew Mr. GMT well. We'd clashed at times. I like challenges because they make you better as a leader, and Mr. GMT really and truly challenged me." GMT was fiercely ambitious. Sean Quillan, his friend since childhood, said he was very proud that every time he made a succession in ranking, he was the youngest in this country to become promoted. That's why, in his mind, he could be commissioner of police. So this is the two-page spread that actually celebrates Belize. And it's not a piece about murder, racism, and this is something that is only part of the story. It is bound to come up sometime, can't be sure as to what point in time in the future, that this woman was having a sexual relationship with this victim of the murder. Now, we shall come to so Matthew Paris is talking about the same game that the conservatives are indulging in, saying that they are revolting against Boris Johnson's cutting the amount of UK contribution to the aid sector. Now, this heading to the piece by Janice Turner is quite true. Quite how she explains this heading, we shall examine. She says that our cities gained riches but lost their soul. And the Times is running the editorial calling for a discontinuation of the taking the knee. Now, taking the knee became fashionable as a protest against the racist policeman murdering George Floyd in America. Let's see how they explain this one. So this is not, they are saying that this is nothing to do with George Floyd being murdered. It's something that predates his murder. And they're lying in saying that racism, they're talking about racism in sport in the call for ending the taking the knee. So they're saying racism unquestionably remains a problem in football, as the recent conviction of the Czech player Hrs Khudeela for abusing an opponent shows. And rooting it out requires relentless action. Kick It Out, football's equality and inclusion organization, does good work in this area, though through its training and education programs. Equally, footballers themselves can have an impact by using the platform open to them, as the example of Marcus Rashford and his campaign against child poverty shows. Though initially a principled statement, taking the knee has exhausted its purpose and is now more divisive than it is helpful. It is time to dispense with it and get on with the game. Now, that's a racist and ignorant editorial perpetuating the racism, not just in football but in the rest of society. Okay, so this is a letter that refers to Kevin Collins. Remember the one that we started talking at the beginning of this part. The resignation of Sir Kevin Collins, reports June 3rd and 4th, demonstrates how the government's announcement fell woefully short of meeting the needs of all children. Now, this is an outrageously false elevation of Collins. They're saying that his resignation is the substance that represents the government's failure, etc., etc. Disruption to their education, care, and support has had a massive impact on them and their families and has hampered their educational and social development. Many have regressed in basic learning and life skills, and their mental well being has suffered. Pupils with special educational needs and disabilities have been hit especially hard as they rely on support services outside school, such as speech therapy, and many of these have been suspended since the beginning of the pandemic. Once again, disabled children have been ignored. We urgently need a clear recovery plan for the disabled children and their families, along with appropriate funding and resources. No child should miss out on access to a quality education. This is from a man called Richard Kramer, chief executive of an outfit called Sense. We shall look at the details of that sense, if it makes any sense at all. So they're talking about select committees. Let's see. Role of MP groups, that is the select committees. So your article has raised several fundamental issues that require urgent attention. The rules and procedures that govern all parliamentary groups should be tightened or possibly overhauled, bringing essential balance and clarity on issues to an effective running of a parliamentary democracy. The all parties parliamentary groups should be a main contributor governed by the Nolan principles to understand and evaluate the subject, including the scrutiny of policy matters. Many benefits could stem from a strengthened, effective, and transparent process, including the strengthening of the Union by ensuring that the debate extends to all four nations of the UK, drawing from expertise and best practice from around the world. Regular reporting of activities and conclusion without duplicating the work of select committees should be free of funding considerations. Now, this refers to the Constitution, doesn't it? That the financial crimes has given a space to Brownell and Maddox to kind of hypothesize on. And although this one has got shorter space, it has actually made better points about the anti-democratic nature of the UK constitution, unwritten constitution. But taken together, both of these pieces, Bronwyn Maddox in the Financial Times and this letter in the Times today, Saturday, the 5th of June, 2021, both of them fail to explain why there is no mention in the papers, in the media, in Parliament about the literally hundreds of obligations that the UK as a signatory state remains under but fails to deliver, as in the context of the thousands of statutes, conventions, agreements, declarations that the UK over the years has become signatory to. And the editorial page, which is talking about taking the knee, of the Times remains completely devoid of any recognition of these statutes, declarations, conventions, agreements. And the last editorial of the three in today's Times is about the G7 summit being held in Cornwall. And it's a piece that mocks Cornwall. Let's see what it says. Will world leaders descending next week on Cornwall for the G7 summit be followed soon by an army of miners in moleskins, picks in hand, eager to get digging for riches in what Boris Johnson has labelled Britain's Klondike? Unlike the rush to Canada's frozen wastes in 1896, it won't be gold thereafter, nor will they be searching for tin, Cornwall's claim to fame since Phoenician times. Today's treasure hunters are instead in pursuit of lithium. This is the magic metal needed to power batteries, drive electric cars, and hasten a greener future. Britain will need 75 tons of lithium carbonate by 2035. Global demand will treble this decade. Geologists believe that there are deposits in the geothermal waters, and beneath the Duchess rocks that could yield at least 30,000 tons of this precious stuff from rock alone. It won't be easy to get out. Extracting lithium carbonate from granite rock, sometimes in disguised clay mines, will need specialized machinery and a lot of money. But already there are signs that speculators have started the rush. And this is a kind of stupid piece of editorial idiocy. Once again, Cornwall can swell Britain's hearts with pride. Pastries and cream teas have spread far beyond its boundaries. Porcelain from England, English china, china clay graces the tea tables of every reputable host, and tin has been mined for thousands of years. An ancient and now largely abandoned workings testify. Lithium sounds reassuringly modern, technological, and valuable. Those thousands of staycationers hoping to descend on Cornwall this summer may want to pack a pick in their boot. I mean, this is stupid. Absolutely stupid, because it doesn't recognize Cornwall's history, Cornwall's identity, and Cornwall's need for recognition and respect. And it doesn't mention the actual realities. The local people are complaining about the descent, the coming descent of the world's so-called leaders. And it doesn't recognize their rights at all. So we shall be continuing in the next part.